Daf Pei Beis Amud Beis, 6 lines from the top. We learned previously that Rav Asi said that a child, up until including the 6th year, is automatically included in the heir of his mother. However, previously we brought down the Brisa that said that he's Katan Shetzorach L'Ima Yoseh Be'erev Yima Ad Ben Sheish, only until 6 years old. So, Frank the Gemara Lemet to have it to the Rav Asi. Let us say that this is a Kashan Rav Asi. Omer Lach Rav Asi, no, Ad V'Ad B'Chlal. What he means to say is Ad V'Ad B'Chlal. When it says the 6th year means up to and including the 6th year. Up to and including the 6th year, he is automatically included with the heir of his mother. Let's say that this should be this price that says until the 6th year should be kasha on Rav Yana Reish Lakish, that said that a child is considered tzarach lima up until 4 years or 5 years, but not beyond. So legabe the din of heir of legabe the chiyuv of sukkah, he's considered tzarach lima up and only till that age. So let us say that it's a tiyuf to the Rav Yana and Rav Reish Lakish. The Gemara says like kasha. When do they say that the child is no longer dependent on the mother? When he's 4 or 5, up until that age and not beyond, that's when the father's in the city. So he has both parents. So we say once he reaches the age of 4 or 5, he's not considered that dependent, so much dependent on his mother, and therefore the Moshe Legabe the din of Sukkah, the father now will have a chiyuv of chinuch on the child because he can be away from the mother. But if the father is not in the city, he's not living in the city, the child is more dependent on the mother, and there we say the dependency is up until the age of 6. A person can make an eruv for the benefit of his young children. Now we learned previously that up until the age, a certain age of 6, that a person, his eruv, the child's eruv, he's automatically included in the eruv of his mother. Over here we're talking about ketanim, as Taisus mentions, under the age of bar mitzvah. So where they're not automatically included in an eruv, but a father can make an eruv on their behalf. He can make an eruv for them, and he can make it for them for the young children, or even for the slaves that he has, or al yidei avda v'shivchos ha'kananim, for an ever shivcha kanani, ben l'daitan ben shaloi l'datan, whether they consent or they don't consent. A child or an Eved, Kanani, the man, the father, the Adon, has jurisdiction over them. He has complete jurisdiction over them, and therefore he can determine where their tchum should be, and therefore he can unilaterally be kaveh the heir for them. But not for an Eved Ivri, but not for his children who are over bar mitzvah. And not for his wife, only with their consent. There he doesn't have complete jurisdiction over them, and their consent is required. There's a machlokes Mishnah Berurah and the Chazon Ish, when he says that he's ma'arev for them on their behalf, does that mean just like he would be ma'arev for somebody else? So just like if one person wants to make an heir for the benefit of his friend, he takes some of his food, but then he has to be mezaka al yedei acher. He has to now transfer it to somebody else to be mezaka this heir for the beneficiary. Because so if he doesn't take it out of his possession, if he doesn't give it to somebody else, he hasn't transferred his reshus, so therefore it does not become the ownership of the recipient, it's not his tchum. And that's what the Mishnah Berurah learns over here as well. That's required in this case as well. However, the Chazon Ish says that no, since over here he can be ma'arv, he can make the heir for them ba'al karachim against their will, they don't need consent, so it's considered as if he would be the ma'arv. And just like he's making it for himself, if he makes it for himself, he's not mezaka al yedei anybody else, he puts the food down, it's his food. Here, he can be ma'ar val koracham. He does not have to be mezaka al yedei acher. Tanya idach lo yaram adam Al Yedei B'noi Ubita Gedolim Val Yedei Avda V'Shivchos HaIvrim V'lo Al Yedei Ishta Ela Midaitam. For this category, you need their consent. Aval Ma'arvu Al Yedei Avda V'Shivchos HaKanan Val Yedei B'noi Ubita Kananim Ben Ladaitan Ben Shalei Ladaitan. But minors or Eved Shiv Kananim, you do not need their consent. Mipnei Shiadan Ki Yadoi, because their hand is his hand, meaning they are under his jurisdiction. Now, if they made their own Eruv, the master made an Eruv, and they made their own Eruv. So we say, in all these cases, whose Eruv is the one that's binding, that we say, Yaitz Mishal Rabban. So in all these cases where they both made the Eruv, because he has control, he has jurisdiction. Except for the wife, because his wife can object. His wife can object to the Eruv that he makes. She has this independence in this regard. She's not under his jurisdiction, and therefore, if she makes her own Eruv, her Eruv is the one that's binding. So, practically more, Isha Ma'ishno, why is a woman different from the children, the Avodim? Why is she different from that? Why is she in the same category as children who are over bar mitzvah, or an Avodim and Shvachais who are an Eved Ivri, an Am Ivriya? They're also not completely under the man, the other than the father's jurisdiction. Mar says in Echanami, Al Rabbi Isha v'chol damilei. Doesn't mean only the Isha, means Isha v'chol damilei. Amar Mar chutz min Isha b'nei shechol limcha. So we're saying that why is the Isha's Eruv the one that's valid and binding is because she can object. Time of the Machi, which seems to imply that it's only if she objects to the husband's Eruv. Hastama nafke b'dabala. That means stam. It implies that if she doesn't object, she doesn't consent, but she doesn't object either. Minastam, you would say that the husband's is binding. I hakatani reisha elami daitam. The reisha says that for this category, the woman and the children who are above bar mitzvah and the evidivri, etc., it has to be midaitam with their consent. My love, the amriyin doesn't. Midaitam consent means that they say affirmative, they say yes to it. Or it says, no, my ela midaitam, the ishtika means that they don't object, that they're quiet, but they don't have to formally accept it. Which excludes the case where they reject it, where they say no. Well, what's said, we learned that if they make an Eruv and the master makes an Eruv, then the Yotzim B'Shel Rabban, the master's is binding. So in the case of an Eved Knani, the master's is binding. So doesn't that imply that over here, Ustamu, that they didn't say no, they didn't officially say they don't want the master's, it's Stoma, and nevertheless, the master's is binding in this case, in the case of Eved Knani, but it says that the woman, the wife, then the husband's Eruv is not binding. She doesn't go out with the Eruv of the husband. She has her own Eruv. And over here, she did not say no. Isn't this a case of stam? And even though it seems to be a case of stam, she didn't say no formally. She didn't formally reject the husband's, and nevertheless it says that hers is binding and not his. Amarava, no, this is considered like she formally said no. This case where she made her own Eruv constitutes a formal rejection, because she made her own Eruv, so this is a machor. She's rejecting the Eruv of her husband. So this is a case of machor, and that's why she's not yotze with the husband, because she said no. But minastam, it would be considered like she accepts the husband's Eruv. Zok the Mishnah, kama hu shir. What is the shir? How much food is needed for the tchum? It's mazon shtei sudas l'kol echad ve'echad. it's a mozen of 2 sudas for each and every person. The standard meal that a person would have, 2 of the standard meal that each person would have, that is what is needed for the tchumim. As the Taz explains, as opposed to Eruv Chatzeres, where we say if you have mozen shtei sudas, you don't need a l'kol echad ve'echad. That suffices for the entire chatzir. The reasoning over there is because if people are independent, they would aser on each other. Now we have mozen shtei sudas that joins them together, and as long as now they're joined together with the chashav suda, they're considered as living together, and therefore they will not aser on each other, and a mozen shtei suda suffices for the entire group. But over here, it's not a question of joining the people together. Each person in Or has to be kind of shvisa, and he has alpaim amma from the place that he's kind of shvisa. So it's his individual house, it's his personal shvisa. So you need, therefore, it's mozen shtei suda, so call echad ve'echad for each and every participant. So what type of food? What's the quantity of the food? Is mezayin l'chol v'lo l'Shabbos. The mozen is what you would normally eat on the weekday and not on Shabbos. And Rabbi Yehuda Shabbos l'chol. And Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's a Shabbos meal, not a weekday meal. Both of them, the kavanah is to be makel. The intent is the lesser amount. It's a machlokes, which is a lesser amount. On the one side, you'd say that the Shabbos is the greater amount. You eat more on a Shabbos meal, you have more delicacies, and it's a mitzvah of kavod Shabbos. So a Shabbos meal would be more. But on the other hand, the svara to say that the Shabbos meal is less, as Rabbi Yehuda says, because you have 3 meals. So you divide up the food into 3 meals, so therefore each meal is a smaller quantity. They both intend to be makel, but it's a smaller shear. So what is the quantity of bread? If you're using bread, what is the quantity of bread that we consider that this is the mozen of shtei sudas? So he says it's a mekikar b'punyan. It's a quantity of bread is a loaf of bread which is purchased for a punyan when there are 4 soim of tuah of wheat is purchased for a selah. The Gemara will discuss the arithmetic and exactly how this works out, but the shiur is, as we'll see, the arithmetic shortly, but the shiur is a half of a kav. The shiur is a chatzi kav, which is 12 bayim. There's 24 bayim, 24 eggs in a kav, and so the shear over here is a chatzi kav, which is 12 bayim. So that's what Rav Yochanan ben Ruka says. Rabbi Shimon Amir shtei yodas l'kikar. He says 2/3 of a kikar misholosh l'kav, when there are 3 in a kav. So his shear, again, we will see the arithmetic in the Gemara, but his shear is not a half of a kav, but it's 1/3 of a kav. It's 1/3 of a kav. So therefore, it's not a 12 bayim, it's 8 bayim. So that's the shear legabe eruv. The guys shabe eruv, and they have this shear chetz lebeis menuga. Now half of that is lebeis menuga. As Rashi explains, Rav Shimon's kula applies to eruv because we're makel by eruv. But he agrees that legabe the din of beis menuga, which is a din doraisa, that we take the larger shear. So therefore, legabe the din of the beis menuga, what we're dealing is a half of the loaf that we were dealing with for the eruv, and therefore the eruv was a half a kav, so now it's 1/4 of a kav. There it was 12 bayim, so this is 6 bayim. What is this din of beis menuga? If a person comes into a beis menuga, a house that has a nega, has saras, so if he comes in and then he's tummy. As soon as he leaves the house, he's tummy. But as far as his clothes being tummy, then he has to remain in the house. He has to delay in the house a shear that it takes the time to eat this suda. The amount of time that it would take to eat the suda, the bread of 6 kavim. The chesed lives and 1/4 and a half of that, which means a half of that shear of that quarter of that loaf. So therefore, that means 3 bayim would be lifsas hagviyim. In the rice of a person eats food that's tomei, he does not become tomei. An adam, a person or kelim, can only become tomei from an avatuma. Midrabon, and one of the Yudches over there were guys, if a person ate food that was tomei, that he also, his body becomes tomei. What is the minimum quantity of the tomei food that he eats that renders him tomei? It's a quarter of the shear that we had for the Erev, which is 12 bayim. This is 3 bayim. Zok the Gemara v'kama shtei seudos. In the Reish of the Mishnah, we had a machlekes Rameir of Yehuda. The mazen that needed, the amount of food that's needed for the Erev is mazen shtei seudos. Rameir says that we're talking mazen l'chol v'loy l'Shabbos, and Rabbi Yehuda says l'Shabbos v'loy l'chol, but neither of them defined what they mean for shtei seudos. Further in the Mishnah, we had the machlekes Rav Yochanan and Rav Shimon, Rav Rogan and Rav Shimon. They did define it, but in the Reish it's not defined. So the question of the Gemara is, how much is shtei seudos? What is the average that a person eats for shtei seudos? So the Goyen Yaakov explains that if a person eats more than the average, is a Ravsan, the amount that's required for the Erev is 2 standard seudos. If he eats less, then it's what he normally eats. But if he eats much more, then it's defined as 2 average seudos. So what is an example of 2 average seudos? Amar Yehuda Amar Rav Tati Rifta Ichraisa. He says the 2 breads that the peasants have, that they're standard breads that the peasants use. Rav Hana bar Hava Amar Tati Rifta Nahar Papisa. He says the 2 loaves that are the the 2 loaves that they have in Nahara Papisa, these 2 loaves of bread. So those are examples of standard loaves of bread. Now we had the machlokes in the Mishnah, Rav Meir and Rav Yehuda, is Mezoin l'chol or l'Shabbos. Which one is the lesser one? So Rav Meir said that it's the mazon of the weekday and not for Shabbos. That's the lesser amount. And Rav Yehuda says, l'Shabbos v'lo l'chol. He says that what you eat less is on the Shabbos meal. So he said the question was, who do you hold like? Between the 2 of them, who do you hold? So Rav answered, he holds Rav Meir's fairly. He holds like Rav Meir, that the meal that we use is, the basis of it is the weekday, not the Shabbos meal. On Shabbos you eat more. And Rav Yosef said, Nami, Rav Meir's really. He says, I also hold like Rav Meir, because according to Rav Yehuda, that what people say, that there's always room for something that tastes good. That therefore the stomach always has room for something that tastes good. So Shabbos we have the special Shabbos dishes, the Shabbos meals that are tasty. So there's always room for that. So we eat more on Shabbos. So therefore, it's more mustaber Rav Meir shita that on Shabbos the meals are bigger, and therefore what we estimate for the Erev are the weekday meals.